From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us this evening, and this is what we have for you on the program. Summit stakes, power plays, climate action and migration top the agenda as EU leaders meet in Brussels. 7-decade high as refugee numbers surge. We speak with former UK Foreign Secretary David Miliband. MH17 most wanted. The Dutch announced 4 suspects in the downing of a Malaysia Airlines jet in Ukraine. Rental freeze. Should European cities follow Berlin's lead and press pause of rising rental prices? And raw chaos the moment the UK's Conservative leadership debate went off the rails. Excuse me. Yeah, but I think it's not going to help, but... Est-ce que je peux garder? Non? OK. Oh. OK. OK. All right. I hope they just focus the camera on you while I turn red. Okay. From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us tonight, and this is what we have on the program. Summit stakes. Power plays, climate action and migration top the agenda as EU leaders meet in Brussels. 7-decade high as refugee numbers surge. We speak with former UK Foreign Secretary David Miliband. MH17 most wanted. The Dutch announced 4 suspects in the downing of a Malaysian Airlines jet in Ukraine. Rental freeze. Should European cities follow Berlin's lead and press pause of rising rental prices? And raw chaos the moment the UK's Conservative leadership debate went off the rails. All right, it is time to meet our panelists this evening. Joining us is Jan Zahradil. He's a Czech MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists group. Hi, Jan. So what story are you watching tonight?
Definitely the summit, because I think it could determine the future of the European Union for many years ahead, and I'm very interested in some general course, not just that much about redistribution of this or that function, but about some general mood.
All right. Okay, joining us as well is Petra de Sutter. She's a Belgian MEP from the Greens EFA group. What about you, Petra?
Yeah, also the summit and mainly the discussions on climate action that will have place. I'm very curious to see how ambitious the Council will be on that.
All right. And also joining us, Javi Lopez. He's a Spanish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats group. What about you, Javi? What are you watching?
Well, the summit and especially the discussion about the EU top jobs, no? Because after the election, it's time to answer the voice of the citizens and try to have a more representative institutions here in the European Union.
Indeed, a lot at stake at that summit, and that is exactly where we are beginning this evening. The stage is set, the stakes are high, as Brussels readies itself for EU leaders to descend and perhaps make or break political careers. Europe's most powerful men and women are expected to discuss and haggle for the first time since the election over who gets the EU's top jobs. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in the room where it will all go down. So, Darren, what should we be looking out for at this summit?
Indeed, Tessa. Welcome, as you say, to one of the most important rooms in European politics. It is here that tomorrow 28 EU leaders will gather to discuss the future of the European Union. This is a room that has seen some of those very important decisions over the last few years taken, not least of all, of course, on this issue of Brexit. And indeed, actually, this will be Theresa May's last summit as British Prime Minister. But this, unlike other summits, is not about Brexit. It is about who is going to get some of those top jobs. Now, people often say, Tessa, that politics is a bit like a dance. Well, if it is, in these circumstances, the music has started, the moves are well underway, and like any good dance, there's going to be lots of twists and turns. Twists and turns to decide who gets this job, the job of Commission President, clearly at the moment held by Jean-Claude Juncker. And I've been looking at the EU summit and what we can expect to see over the next couple of days. Welcome to the EU Council building here in Brussels. This is the place where presidents, prime ministers and chancellors gather from across the EU to talk. And it is here that they'll stride down the red carpet. But before they do, let's take a sneaky peek at what they'll be talking about. First up is this issue of climate change. Now, the Greens got their best ever result in last month's European elections. And now the pressure is on EU leaders to get their climate plans together, not least of all to try and make the EU carbon neutral by 2050. One man who wants them to do more is the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Ahead of this summit, he's calling for the EU to commit to more than halving greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Next up is the issue of enlargement, or adding more countries to the EU. Now, earlier on this year, Macedonia changed its name to North Macedonia. Why? Because it has helped end a bitter and long-running dispute with its neighbour, Greece. The hope was that it would unblock the country's progress to joining the EU. But with pushback from France and the Netherlands, the final decision has been delayed until October. Next up, it's the question that's been echoing around the coffee shops here in Brussels. Who is going to get the EU's top job? Who is going to be the next Commission President? Now, the lead candidate from the European Parliament remains the EPP's Manfred Weber. But Donald Tusk has also been touring EU capitals, trying to come up with a list of names for the EU leaders to consider. Expected to be on that list is the Liberal Margrethe Vestager, Socialist Frans Timmermans, and the Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier. Well, let's get an insight from a man who knows about these things. We're joined by Alberto. Thank you very much for joining us. What are you looking out for at this council?
Well. This council will be very important in terms of preparation time. Basically, the council, the head of state and government have to meet in order to discuss what kind of rules we're going to follow this time, because the rules are changing because the center of gravity in the parliament and the council do not overlap. So inevitably the council cannot decide alone. This time has to follow the parliament. Last time the parliament could actually choose because the two major mainstream parties, the Socialists and the EPP, they clearly had a majority. They knew they would have governed together. This time is not going to happen.
But are we going to get a name this time?
Some names will be circulating. Those names are those we call Spitzenkandidaten. Those names will be there. But obviously people are questioning, is Ms. Vestager really a Spitzenkandidatin? Well, she has decided to run right after, but I think she's one of the names. But there might be some other names popping out of the box, and those names may be allowed into the process. But we are not there yet, because what is going to be the driving factor will be who is going to find a majority within the parliament, and that person will be the President of the European Commission.
And if I don't really press you on it, who do you say is going to get that top job?
Well, I see two names. I think Frans Timmermans and Margrethe Vestager are today the most likely to find the support of the Greens and obviously the Liberals. So they clearly start with some advantage these days.
Alberto, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Costing more than 300 million euros, this new building is affectionately known as the Egg. But as EU leaders gather here to discuss those contentious issues, do expect some cracks. Yes, EU summits happen all the time, but be in no doubt that this one will go a long way to help shape the future direction and look of the European Union for many, many years to come.
It's all about who that person will be, isn't it? So, Darren, what are the chances that we'll actually at least get some names out of this summit?
Well, we may well get some names, but possibly not a decision, it must be said. Tessa, now, Donald Tusk has been working pretty hard, the man who sits there during these meetings, talking to over a dozen EU leaders yesterday. He has also been talking to Parliament representatives as well, trying to get consensus. And interestingly, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, said that she wants a decision before Parliament meets on July 2nd. Now, to add all that, a really important meeting tomorrow ahead of the summit will be between Macron, Merkel and Tusk to see if they can come up with some names or at least make some progress. But Tessa, the problem with this process is, as I say, it is like a dance. You have to take in a whole load of considerations, whether that is the political parties that someone might belong to, the nationality of that person, and indeed the gender balance as well. It's a lot to be decided upon. And yes, Tessa, the problem is that it may not be decided tomorrow evening in this room. It may not even be decided on Friday lunchtime. It could well go to another EU summit. Much speculation, that could be June 30th.
Thanks for that, Darren. I mean, and picking up on what Darren was saying, I mean, this is exactly what makes this horse trading, as everyone is calling it, really interesting in the European sense, because you know, there's got to be balance of nationalities. You get this, I get that. If you have this power, I get this. And then gender balance and political parties. But the criticism on that kind of process is that the person who's going to take Jean-Claude Juncker's job is going to carry on a very, very big problem with, you know, the things that you want to deal with. Climate change, you have the rise of populist nationalism. Shouldn't just the best person be winning rather than this horse trading where it might sacrifice who the best person is? What do you think?
How do you define the best person? I think the best person...
The most qualified for the job is to deal with all the problems that you'll be taking on.
Who can measure the qualification? I think the job of politician is a strange kind of job. It's hardly measurable. And I think that this time the political landscape of the European Parliament, for instance, is much more complicated than ever before. So various coalitions could be built. And I think that probably the most consensual candidate can be the choice, not the candidate which represents the strongest party or the most visible party, but such a candidate that is able to build the largest majority behind him or behind her in the European Parliament, and of course gets the Council approval at the same time. So it will be much more complicated than ever before. It would take a lot of concessions from all sides, and I'm very curious about the results.
So with the quality that you're pointing out there is someone who can build consensus. Is that the most important here?
It's a political job.
Or rather than the strongest image? I don't know. So it's consensus.
Yeah, it's a political job. That means you need to have a political consensus, and the Parliament, as it was said, is very important in that process. As you know, there are negotiations between political groups on a program that the Commission will have to execute, and the President of the Commission will be the person that leads the team that will have to execute that program. That's a first in history. So the Parliament will have an important voice, because now we need more parties to find a coalition than ever before. And that means that you need a politician who really has the majority in the Parliament, not a technocrat. If you say it's the best person for the job, you could say, well, it could be a technocrat. Not a technocrat. It should be somebody who's competent, but also a good politician.
What do you think, Javi? And do you agree with the names that were brought up there? Top two would be Vestager and Timmermans.
Well, I think it's a possibility, no? But the point is, like, we are talking about a political job. It's not a discussion about names. We are talking about what kind of strategical orientation the EU will have the next years, and especially what kind of policies and approach to the reality, priorities that the new European Commission will have. And this is the point. And now, in a political landscape really fragmented, you need 3 political families in the Council, and you will need 3 political families to build a consensus, a majority in the Parliament. Well, build a majority and to be consensual, it's a key point.
3 or 4.
Or 3 or 4, but you will need at least 3 points. And secondly, and this is really important, this process will be the end of the hegemony of one family, the Popular Party, in Europe. This is quite clear.
Yes. So go ahead.
Also, you have to have some, let's say, east-west balance as well. If we are talking climate change, how many...
So would you like an Eastern European...
How many Green MEPs do you think have been elected in 11 Central and Eastern European countries, so-called post-communist countries? Zero. Which means that the reflection or understanding or approach of Central and Eastern Europe towards this whole climate change thing is a bit different than, for instance, in Germany or France or elsewhere. And also some kind of consensus has to be found here as well.
So who understands Eastern Europe the most, given the front-runner names?
I have to tell you that I don't know. They have to show up. They have to show up.
Okay, and what about, is this wishful thinking? Her name keeps coming up, Angela Merkel. Is she a viable candidate and realistic is the word?
Well, if I may
if she wants the job.
If the name of Angela Merkel is named, it is because of political reasons. That means that an EPP candidate could be acceptable if it's not Mr. Weber. Let's not
So you don't think
be
she's
mistaken.
the consensus candidate that
she's
Europe
the name
needs?
named to have Mr. Barnier enter in the debate. So that's what I think. So she has already clearly said that she would not take that job.
Yeah.
So if Mr. Macron is still calling her name, it's because he accepts CPP, but not Mr. Weber.
Game.
It's the dance that we were talking about.
Okay.
And well, we will discuss about the president of the Commission, but we will have the president of the Council.
Yes.
We will have the High Representative.
The ECB.
And the president of the Parliament, and we are quite autonomous in take this kind of decisions.
Chair of the ECB.
And then we will have a balance between these roles, and at the same time a balance, political balance, obviously gender balance, and geographical balance.
Right. But you don't want a token person as well, like for the sake of ticking those boxes that you were enumerating.
No, I think it would be too early. It would be too early. I think that those debates are just at the beginning. There's a lot of tactical games being played at the moment.
Game,
so,
clearly.
you know.
Very quickly, you were a Spitzenkandidat, a lead candidate for your party. You ran. Is that dead? That process?
Be
honest.
I would say almost. Yeah, I would say almost. I think I never believed in the process in the sense that the strongest party should have the automatic right to nominate a council or commission president.
Okay.
I believe that some wider coalition is needed, and the person who is better able to build such a coalition in the parliament has also a better chance to be nominated.
All right, so one of these are the topics that we're looking at the summit, but another one that is also going to be on the agenda that EU leaders are expected to talk about is, of course, migration, such a big issue here in Europe. And ahead of that summit, there is a dramatic new report about the number of refugees. Now, the UN says that at the end of 2018, there were 70.8 million displaced people in the world, and that is a record high in the UN's almost 70 years of existence. And according to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the burden is not being shared equally.
Between 80 and 90% of this 70 million are not in rich countries. They are in poor countries. They are in what we call middle-income countries. In other words, they are in countries that have less resources to address this crisis. Very often, we tend to think of the one big refugee crisis affecting the rich world. This is the perception that many people have. And it is wrong. The statistics tell us another story, that it is very often, unfortunately, a crisis of the poor.
So staggering numbers there by the UN, and this is, we're marking World Refugee Week, and I did catch up with the CEO of the International Rescue Committee and the former UK Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, and I did ask him on this very important issue about whether the anti-migrant measures, which we have seen in measures introduced by several European countries and also the last European elections, what if this is the new normal here in Europe?
Well, I don't think it needs to be, and I don't think one can generalise at the moment. Because remember, 75% of those elected to the European Parliament didn't fall for the nativism or the nationalist pitch that some of the parties put. I think there are two things going on.
Okay.
One is that we've got more refugees than ever before, and the world doesn't have a humanitarian system that knows how to deal with them and support the countries that are hosting them. Remember, most refugees are not in Europe. 8% of the world's refugees are in Europe. 86% are in poor countries like Jordan, Lebanon, Uganda, Ethiopia. Bangladesh even took 700,000 Rohingya. The second thing that's going on is that more people are choosing to move. There are more people moving around the world, both within Europe and from outside the European Union, and countries have to develop immigration policies that are sensible in the world. Where you end up in trouble is when the two get confused, which happens quite a lot.
In what way is it being confused now?
Well, because people hear 28 million refugees, and then they think, well, hang on, there are 250 million people moving for economic reasons. And then they think, oh, my goodness, everyone's coming here. Well, they're not. And it's a duty of every government to manage the flows of people. I don't think we should be afraid of saying that. But what I'm saying to people is, don't make the refugees the scapegoats. People who are fleeing their lives for war, don't make them the scapegoats for the failure to develop a sensible immigration policy.
But Europe is struggling to come up with a meaningful and substantial way of redistributing refugees, even those that are already inside. It is a big problem. Not just the border control, but on how
That's a very good point. And you know why I think that's happening?
Why?
Because in 2013, 2014, when we could see in Lebanon and Jordan an explosion was coming, we warned that an explosion was coming because Lebanon and Jordan were coping with all of the Syrian refugees and Turkey. Europe was focused on the Greek crisis and on the Ukraine invasion by the Russians. It didn't have in place an entry and exit checking system. It didn't have in place a relocation system. And so we're saying now, look, Europe's got to play catch up. But that's not a reason to believe that simply putting up walls is going to sort out the problem. It's not.
Very quickly, before we move on to another topic, where is Europe failing when it comes to dealing with refugees?
Well, it doesn't have a legal route to entry through a resettlement route. It doesn't have a common flaw of asylum policies, which I think are important, and it doesn't do fast or efficient enough processing of those who arrive. Remember, there are people in Greece who've arrived 3 or 4 years ago who still don't have a...
Bill, they rolled out those measures last year, so they are doing a very good job,
no, they weren't agreed. That's the point. Right. They were blocked precisely by the Salvini government that you were citing earlier. So there are some things where Europe needs to step up, but it's not going to step up by pretending that the answer is to, as you put it, criminalise NGOs that are fishing people out of the water, that are scooping people out of the water in the Mediterranean. And they're not going to do it by pretending that problems on Europe's doorstep will stay on the doorstep if they're not addressed.
I mean, David Miliband there is raising issues that we all know that there is still no real solution in EU level. I mean, it's a really difficult topic. So, Javi, what do you think about the migration issue? Is it still a crisis, and how do we go about solving this?
Well, first of all, we have to see the numbers, the data, and it was quite clear. People and countries of our neighborhood, they are really dealing with that.
But do you think the summit will bring an answer to this issue now? It's front and center again, and 5 years plan?
It's quite divisive topic, and we know it. But at the same time, to try to deal with migration and to face our responsibilities in terms of refugees, we need a European answer. We need a control of borders that is European, a management of the refugees that it has to be European. Especially see our neighborhood, how Turkey or Jordan or Lebanon, they are taking the responsibilities and not us.
Should Europe be taking in more migrants? Refugees, that is.
Don't ask the question like that.
Yeah.
Should we take
this is the question.
It's a complex issue. You have to tackle the origins of migration. There is a humanitarian aspect. There is a solidarity aspect within the EU, and not only within the world. It's a global issue, and it's going to stay. Yeah. So we have to think about this and have serious answers to this.
But the numbers are staggeringly high for refugees now. Okay, very quickly.
This is another example of certain misunderstanding, or rather difference between East and West once again, because Eastern countries, East European countries, are much more concerned about some arbitrary redistribution systems like quota or something like that. And I think that their concerns should be taken into account, and unfortunately the former Commission didn't do that.
Okay, so no one is optimistic that tomorrow there'll be an answer. Okay, all right. Well, coming up on Raw Politics, the winners and losers from last night's Tory leadership debate in London. Plus, 5 years after MH17 captured the world's attention, investigators are naming the suspects responsible for the deadly plane crash. That's up next. Welcome back to the program. Now, it's been nearly 5 years since Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was shot down in eastern Ukraine, killing all 298 people on board. Well, today, Dutch investigators have named 4 men who will be charged with murder over the downing of that plane. Alex and her team in theCUBE have been looking into that. Alex.
Tessa, these are the images that shocked the world from that July when that aircraft came down. Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 coming down over eastern Ukraine, shot down over eastern Ukraine. And for the families of those on board, wanting answers, wanting justice has been their priority. And today we've had an advance in terms of the Dutch-led investigation, because so many of those who lost their lives on board were Dutch citizens. These prosecutors naming 4 men they want to put on trial in relation to the downing of this aircraft. Let's take you through these 4 men. 3 of them are Russian. The first is Igor Girkin. Now, he is a former colonel for the FSB, that is, of course, the Russian agency. His deputy, prosecutors say, was this man, Sergei Dubinsky. Then we go on to another Russian individual, Oleg Pulatov. They say a former soldier for Russian special forces. And then we have one Ukrainian, not with a formal military background, but prosecutors say this man, Karchenko, was a commander of Eastern Ukrainian forces. They say that even if these men didn't directly push the button of the Buk missile launcher that brought down that aircraft, they bear responsibility for bringing that weapon into eastern Ukraine. In fact, let's just bring you a look at the charges they are facing, if I bring those up for you. Vesterbeck, the man who was standing up delivering this press conference today, saying they will be put on trial for bringing down the aircraft, for murder, for bringing in that weapon to eastern Ukraine. An international arrest warrant is out for the men, but it's very unlikely we're going to see them standing trial when it kicks off next year, because Russia and Ukraine do not recognize extradition demands, extradition requests for people to be taken to The Hague. Now, that's why the investigators say they haven't formally asked these men to be brought there. But of course, if they do try and travel, there's that arrest warrant that might catch them. Now, Bellingcat, the investigative journalist network, had originally named a lot more men as part of their investigation. People asking, why did the prosecutors only bring up 4 of these men? Well, some of the journalists saying that this is probably because these are the ones the prosecutors feel most confident about. There could well be names coming in the future. But if I might end on the thoughts of the families. One of those poor guards spoke to us here on Euronews, and this is what he had to say. He lost both his parents on that flight, speaking to us earlier on.
I'm not sure that any closure will ever be achieved. For me, closure would be if the conflict was solved and there was an assurance that it wouldn't flare up again, and also closure for me would probably be more making sure this doesn't happen again, so improving safety of passenger airlines flying over conflict zones.
The families want closure. Unlikely we'll see those men on trial, but that date set for 2020.
Thank you for that, Alex, and our team in the queue. Okay, let's move on now. In the UK, the race to succeed Theresa May is in full swing. After former Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab had been eliminated from the contest yesterday, the 5 remaining candidates faced off in a televised debate. They all vowed to successfully lead Britain out of the EU, but they had different ideas on how to break the Brexit deadlock. Let's take a listen.
We must come out on the 31st of October, because otherwise I'm afraid we face a catastrophic loss of confidence in politics.
If I got to the 31st of October and there was no prospect of a deal that can get us out of the EU, then I would be out. I'd leave without a deal. If there was a prospect, if we were nearly there, then I would take a bit longer.
If we're almost there on October the 30th and we just need an extra couple of days to do it, who could object to taking an extra 24 or 48 hours to get it over the line?
I do respectfully disagree with Jeremy and Michael on this, because we've got to learn from our mistakes. One of the mistakes we've made so far is by having this sort of flexible deadline. If you don't have a deadline, you do not concentrate minds, and that also includes the minds of our European friends.
It is not going to be possible to negotiate a new deal with the European Union by the 31st of October. In the end, we are in a room with a door, and the door is called Parliament. And I'm the only person here trying to find the key to the door. Everybody else is staring at the wall, shouting, "Believe in Britain."
But my worry is that, Boris, if we got to October the 31st and we were so close to getting that deal over the line, would you at that point say, Michael, we're almost there.
I share Michael's.
October the 31st. Can you give me that guarantee?
Michael was guaranteeing to get out by the end of December. I think that October the 31st is eminently feasible.
All right, we're joining us in the studio for this is Louisa Porritt, a British MEP-elect from the Renew Group. We also have joining us Dharmendra Kanani, Director of Insights from Friends of Europe. And still with us is Jan Zahradil, Czech MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformist Group. All right, Louisa, watching that, everyone thinks they have the answer to breaking the Brexit deadlock. Who do you think actually holds a reasonably, a key that would potentially unlock that deadlock?
Well, unfortunately, they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So virtually all of them are not ruling out a no-deal Brexit, which is grossly irresponsible for the country. It's going to be damaging both for the UK and for other countries in Europe. And the only one who's saying anything remotely sensible on that front is Rory Stewart. But he's unlikely to succeed, unfortunately, because the Conservative Party membership will be voting on this ultimately. And they have been consistently told by politicians in the Conservative Party that everything's going to be fine. And the public's been told that as well. So that's why we're in this mess, because lies have been spun from the outset.
Are there any new ideas that you heard from there, Dharmendra, that...
None whatsoever. I have to say, it's a bit of a tragedy. It's like watching Shakespeare. And you had, what was a shame was that poor Rory Stewart had this moment of looking down like Hamlet, and I thought, boy, it's like act differently, because actually
but isn't
he's
he
got
a
everything
dark
to win.
horse?
He is the dark horse. And the thing is that the 1922 committee, and I think the rump of the Labour members will want a strongman politics. He's softly spoken, he doesn't look the thing. People will look for that. And Boris has got everything which is like a posh thug that will lie and say, we will do this, because no one's actually saying, Theresa May stood on that podium and saying exactly the same thing. I will deliver this, this deal. And they've all saying the same thing. Yeah. They're puppets, but they're not, none of them are actually seeing the opportunity they could have to change. But also, I don't think anyone is concerned about the citizen in this debate.
And at the end of this, I mean, we're looking at these debates. Still, the front runner is still Boris. Jan, your comment on having Boris Johnson here as potentially the new Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, I'm very sad about Dominic Raab, because he's half
was
Czech.
He the one you like?
His father was Czech. He fled from Czechoslovakia to UK in 1938. It would be nice to have a UK Prime Minister who is half Czech. But on Boris Johnson, I think that he has a good chance to win. And I believe that this is because he's probably, for the party activists and for conservative MPs...
How do you feel about that? How do you feel about Boris Johnson coming here?
To deliver Brexit. And I think that these people who will decide, which means MPs and party activists, they really want Brexit to be delivered. I'm not happy about Brexit, but I can understand their temptation that they want this chapter to be closed once and forever. And I think that Boris Johnson is probably the most persuasive from that point of view.
All right, and someone else who had an opinion on Boris Johnson is David Miliband, the former UK Foreign Secretary. I spoke to him on the sidelines of the European Development Days. Let's listen to this.
We didn't need to be in the place we're in today. And we're in the place we're in today because Mrs. May drew red lines that could not be squared.
So that was a fault.
Her commitments to stay out of the customs union, to stay out of the single market, and not to have a hard border in the island of Ireland has landed us in the mess that we're in today.
She had to do that to appease...
No, she didn't. I mean, that's always the excuse. Remember, David Cameron said he had to have a referendum to appease. And I've had enough of people who are appeasing factions in their own party and forgetting what the national interest is. There's a huge responsibility now on Boris Johnson, because he's obviously he'll come to Brussels eventually, and assuming he becomes Prime Minister, and he comes with the burden of his reputation.
Right.
And there are going to be a lot of people expecting the worst, and he's got to show that actually rational engagement, not the pursuing what are called the unicorn theory of the never-never land.
Wonderful unicorn, yes.
The never-never land of the Brexiteers.
All right, so he is, talking about appeasing the Tory party, but let me ask you, Louisa, this is exactly what everybody here in Brussels is doing, isn't it? I mean, they appease their electorates back home, they try to appease, their voters, their parties. He's tired of seeing that, but it's just the way politicians conduct their business here in Brussels?
Perhaps, but I don't think that politicians should be trying to appease people with unrealistic
promises. But they won't stop doing that. Whoever gets the job, they won't stop doing that.
This is so much more fundamental than that. Brexit is about a more than 40-year relationship that we've had as a member of the European Union. And actually, unravelling that is extremely complex, as Theresa May found out very fatally in her case for her leadership. So it's very different to a general election where politicians do make all sorts of promises.
But she did stay in power long enough.
Things after 5 years.
Sure, she's now...
But they didn't have an alternative. Now they feel as if they need to do something about it. But Jess, I go back to your point, is that, look at the recent parliamentary elections in Europe. There's been a real reality check and a wake-up call for the centrist parties and others to actually say, we cannot continue making the deals that we have or operate the way they do.
You said they forget the citizens.
Absolutely. And I think if they continue to do that, especially if you guys do the kind of deals that you've always done, you're not going to move this forward, and you're not going to take the opportunity of an engaged citizenry for the first time. Actually, for 2 decades, we haven't had this kind of upsurge. I think it would be so important that the new Green Power, the Liberals and others really stand tall and actually create a different kind of momentum. And that's the thing about the UK. The thing is that you're going to have the second time a Prime Minister with the by-election, put that aside, that has not been chosen by the general public.
Sure. Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
this opportunity is huge, but I think Boris has had his hand in the till. What I don't understand is that others are not standing up saying he was part of the original deal.
Okay.
He's lied to Parliament. He's been fined. Do you want that as your Prime Minister? And people are not talking about it.
All right. Well, I'll get to you, Jan, a little bit later, because now let's move on, because someone else is vying for a leadership position. Over in the U.S., Donald Trump's formally announced that he will be running again for president. Let's take a look.
We're going to keep it better than ever before. And that is why tonight I stand before you to officially launch my campaign for a second term as President of the United States. Our country is now thriving, prospering, and booming. And frankly, it's soaring to incredible new heights. So the wall is moving along. It's moving along rapidly. It's beautiful. I changed the design. It's stronger, bigger, better, and cheaper. Let me hear it. Ready? Make America great again.
Jan, your comments?
Well, I think he's very well poised to win again. And I think that I know that European view on Donald Trump is highly critical, but I think that maybe we should show some better understanding for what's going on in US these days, because Donald Trump himself, he's not a reason why EU-US relations are changing. He is a product of changing relations between EU and US that started even before he was elected to the office. And this is a very serious geopolitical challenge we have to face in the future.
It does look likely that he might have a second term anyway. Okay.
But I think it's the Democrats need to stand up and do a different deal.
Okay. All right. Well, coming up on Raw Politics, we head to Berlin, where the landlords will soon have to freeze rising rental prices. But what about the rest of Europe? That's coming up next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, exhausted with soaring housing prices, which are forcing them out of the city, finally, some good news for renters in Berlin. A new proposal put forward by the city government aims to freeze rents in the capital for 5 years. Due to come into effect in January 2020, the proposal has divided Germany's coalition government. But for Berliners themselves, who have been marching against rent increases for years, it is a sigh of relief. Once the most affordable place in Europe, rent prices have doubled in the past decade in a city where 85% of people rent their homes. And joining us to discuss this are Marian Harkin. She's an Irish MEP with the Liberals and Democrats group. And we still have with us Dharmendra Kanani, Director of Insights from Friends of Europe, and Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. But before I get to you guys to ask you about your comments on this, I'd like to bring up a graphic, because rents in Berlin may have skyrocketed recently, but it is still not the most expensive place in Europe, believe it or not. Let's take a look at where are these expensive places. So with an average 2-bedroom apartment costing 2,265 euros, Switzerland's Zurich is the most expensive city to rent in Europe, followed by Paris, not far behind, then London in third place, Dublin in fourth, and Amsterdam and Denmark taking fifth and sixth place, with rent averaging 1,600 euros a month. So these are pricey. So when we see suggestions or proposals to freeze rent, is this the way to go about dealing with this crisis that people are getting very angry about? So Dublin is on that list.
It's on that list.
You freeze the rent.
I think what you need is a number of measures. I think the problem is we have financialised housing. Housing is no longer about where you live or where I live. Housing now is about profit. And especially in a city like Berlin, where 80% of people rent, and they didn't have problems up to, let's say, post the financial crisis, when lots of institutions and financial vehicles, shall we say, looked to Berlin, saw the possibility of making money, because that's what it's about. So I think there's a suite of packages needed, and I think rent controls form part of that suite.
But controlling the rent is not going to solve the problem that there is a shortage, that people need more houses.
No,
the cities.
I've rented in London, in Dublin, and in Brussels in the last couple of years. Compared to prices in Berlin, they're a lot more expensive. I don't think kind of capping rents, which is what they have tried to do to a degree in Dublin and indeed elsewhere, it does work, because in the short term, it may seem like a really good solution. But what does it do in the long term? Well, ultimately, that cap can only go on for so long. 5 years in Berlin is going to see those prices jump in 5 years' time. If you don't solve the fundamental problem there, which is a lack of housing stock. I mean, essentially, the only way to deal with the housing crisis or to deal with high rental prices is...
But aren't landlords taking advantage of that shortage, though?
Well, the problem is, though, if you put on a rental cap, that will just discourage people, landlords, essentially, from renting out their properties and actually make the squeeze even...
But don't we always say that?
Okay. No, I disagree. And with all due respect, I think this is the most progressive thing a European city can do. When you think about... I take your point, but housing, access to rental and ownership, right, has always been the first ladder in the step for economic development and economic growth for an individual or a local society. We know that. That's historic. Here, what's interesting about this is that the rate of profit has more than doubled for landlords. So what they can do is sustain the rents for the next 5 years at this rate. And what you need is more, and it's not just housing stock, you need more affordable housing. And there are solutions that can be around, that Berlin will look at in terms of joint ownership and looking at mutual ownership, which are really interesting models. But I think this is one way to make sure you've got balanced communities. You don't just get... I mean, there's lots of housing stock available, but for the rich. Look at London and most of the other cities, they've become Airbnb cities. But this is about making sure that local people and mixed communities can stay in a city.
Okay, it's a suite of measures that's needed. I agree with Darren. It's short term, but in that short term, then government has to look at other options. You talked about some of them there. And it is about building affordable housing that people can afford to live in. And one of the issues I think that a lot of Berliners will face is that many of those people, or at least a certain proportion, are, no longer earning. They're on pensions. And when you're on a fixed pension and rents are beginning to increase, it's just impossible to continue to live there.
Okay.
So it's not the solution, but it's part of it.
But isn't then there's also the problem, there's quite a crude way of dealing with it, because ultimately, where is that cap going to come in? It's still going to be unaffordable for a lot of people. So actually, even in the short term, it'll help some renters, but those renters will tend to be people who are on middle incomes. It won't help the poorest, because ultimately, actually, that cap will still remain way too high.
I think you'll balance things out, but you're quite right. It's going to be only support those who are currently in the marketplace, right? But what it will do is make Berlin think about the kind of affordable housing stock it puts into place for those who are on minimum incomes, and actually those you can charge extra rate to actually, offset the economic boon that they might gain for actually living in that city. And it's about spreading that love and money. I think it's a different way of doing it. I think it's much more interesting.
And what about back from the financialisation of housing?
It also says that, people as well as financial... I think the message you're getting from Berlin is that actually making money and people do not have to be a trade-off. People are as important as making money.
Now we see landlords increasing before that law comes into effect. They're increasing.
Well, no, undoubtedly true. But I also have to think that ultimately, when you look at most of these cities, and Dublin is a perfect example of this, also true in places like Berlin, is that there simply aren't enough houses. Their populations are increasing, and there are not enough houses, particularly houses of a certain type. Because, for example, to use this example of Dublin, there are actually lots of kind of family-sized homes. But what Dublin is attracting is lots of young bright graduates who don't want to live in family-sized homes, they want to live in apartment blocks. And all I would say about Berlin is anyone who's been to Berlin, I mean, it's not for want of space. I mean, that city has got lots and lots of space to build places.
But the UN Special Rapporteur has actually criticised the Irish government for facilitating what we call cuckoo funds or vulture funds coming into Ireland, buying up the housing stock, etc. So there's a suite of measures needed, Darren.
But
one good measure is not enough, but it is a rebalancing.
But one of the things that we're missing is what created the last financial crisis was the overinvestment, the bloated risk in housing market. We mustn't lose sight of that.
That's right.
You know, as we look ahead.
Interesting point to make indeed. And this is spreading across different cities already, this kind of looking at capping rent prices. Okay, coming up on Raw Politics, we want to hear from you on this very topic. Does your city need a rental freeze? Well, your call is coming up at 7 p.m. Brussels time. The contact information is on the screen now. It is 00800 3333702. That's a free phone number. You can also join the debate using the hashtag Raw Politics on social media. Our lines are opening soon after the break. Welcome back to the program. So next up, it is your call right after the Raw Politics show. So get calling in at 7 p.m. Brussels time, 6 p.m. if you are in London. So we have Darren McCaffrey, he's hosting tonight. And still with us is Marian Harkin and Dharmendra Kanani. So, okay, 3 questions as usual every night. Darren?
Yeah, indeed. And actually ones that really affect lots of people in lots of different ways about what your priority in politics actually is, from housing through to refugees and indeed the health of our kids. Let's have a look at tonight's hot topics. 70 million. That's the total number of people who've been forced to flee their homes throughout the world. As a new UN report reveals, a record number of people are escaping persecution, conflict and violence. Europe's own migration crisis might have abated, but thousands continue to flee the Middle East, Africa and South America. And as the UNHCR chief praised Angela Merkel, saying she had paid a heavy political price for her approach to migration, we want to know, should Europe accept more refugees? Vaccines, they could save your life, but not everyone agrees that they do. A new study finds that France is more sceptical about vaccines than any other nation. And they're not alone. Trust in vaccines tends to be lower in richer countries, making the world more vulnerable to deadly infectious disease, according to the report. While France has responded by making some vaccines compulsory, Italy is allowing schools to ban unvaccinated children. So we're asking, should governments enforce vaccinations? And welcome to Berlin, a city cracking down on sky-high rents by freezing prices for 5 years from 2020. The German capital has drawn people from far and wide to live and work, but it's pricing out the locals, with the rental price for an average flat surging to more than €1,000. The move is a win for some residents who've been protesting for years, while Zurich, London and others are also seeing rocketing rents. So should others follow Berlin's lead? Does your city need a rental freeze? Come on, Europe, have your say. Should Europe accept more refugees? Should governments enforce vaccinations? And does your city need a rental freeze? Well, while that's been playing, we've been having a pretty heated discussion about vaccinations. But we want to hear from you too. Call us on 00800 333 3702. It is free. You can also email us at rawpol@euronews.com. Love to see you on Skype. Use the handle Raw Politics, or indeed use the hashtag Raw Politics on either Facebook or Twitter.
So shall we continue that debate that was already starting here? So should governments be enforcing vaccinations? But you were saying this is such a first world problem.
I think it's a first world problem. When you think about the kind of conversation and the debate that's being had, it's almost as if politicians and states have forgotten why we have the availability of free vaccinations in the North world and the First World. And I think that one of the issues is that how do governments protect their health bill in the future? And one of the issues here is if you do consistent, effective vaccinations in schools and you take that prevention, you're going to save in the long term. And that's an important thing.
The skepticism is really high in the richer countries, in fact. But it doesn't sit well with you enforcing vaccinations.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to look. There's often something underneath everything else. People have lost trust in institutions, whether they're health or government or whatever. So therefore, nobody in the first world is now ready to accept the word of another. That's the way we're living our lives. So in that context, I think we have to find a way to get that trust back so that people understand the value.
But in the meantime, you're going to have people who are not getting vaccinated.
Yeah, and I think while education is key to that, I still think at the end of the day, the first role of government is to protect its citizens.
Exactly.
And if some people are going to be so reckless that they are potentially putting more vulnerable people, young
So how
kids
do you
or the
balance
elderly
that
at
with
risk by
choice?
refusing to take vaccinations, I think the government does have a role to act.
Well, what is their role? Do you say that the government goes into the schools, every child's arm goes out, injection? We can't.
Why not?
You can.
We can't. There's something.
Or you ban them from school.
Well, you may find other ways, but enforcing vaccination, putting something into somebody's system, to me, it just doesn't sit right. What about civil rights? I mean...
Indeed, but, you know, welfareism, where it was started, where we created the purpose of a state, is, as Darren said, is to protect and ensure the security of individuals and citizens. This is a key issue we discovered. This is a first world problem. I think we should really, you know...
This could go on.
It could go on. Okay, we
Yeah.
would like you to join this debate, in fact, so you can call in and let us know what you think. Marion is ready. Okay, you can call us for free at 00800 333 7002. Send us an email at rawpoll@euronews.com, and on social media, use the hashtag #RawPolitics. And again, you can look for us on Skype. Okay, before we go, tonight's Raw Moment, which comes from last night's Tory leadership debate, where clarity wasn't exactly the word of the night. Let's take a look.
Jeremy is saying
then you are saying
you'd
not
be happy with no Brexit.
No,
I'm totally wrong for our
we can't hear.
Rory Stewart, we can't hear anything.
Going to get an implementation
sides of the House.
There's no
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Why would they sign up to that implementation period?
Sorry, we can't hear.
We can't hear.
What is your plan, Rory,
Finish
for
quickly.
education and children's
Finish
services?
quickly.
What would you change?
But the question is how are you going to fund it?
Yeah.
That's the key question. Because it's easy to make...
On that note...
You do have to have techniques to get people to stop.
Well, I think even though we edited it together, you may suspect we did, you still give you a sense of how... I mean, there was so much pruning and peacocking last night.
Absolutely.
And you know what? People talk about politics and why they're turned off by it. That's 5 men standing around shouting over each other.
Classic example of why you turn off.
There you go. I think.
But
Okay.
yet, we need politics.
Okay.
Yes,
We
and
need
not this
it.
programme. Don't turn off
we
this
would like
programme.
you. Okay, call in. Don't forget your call after Raw Politics. Thank you for watching us tonight. Use hashtag Raw Politics. See you.